And the more, like, which is ironic because Donald Trump used to be a great room reader in general.
Yes.
But he has completely lost his sauce, and he just regularly amps up the rhetoric thinking that like the people like it. Let's talk about your opinion. You watched the debate last night. You watched the Kamala showdown, and you saw Mamala.
Yeah.
She spoke. Did she speak to your heart?
Well, as always, I've been a Constitution Party Chuck Baldwin voter since I could vote in 2008. But, if I'm voting 10 times for Chuck, maybe she'll get number 11. I don't know. Like, it was, I, of course, am not voting in this election. I have not. The last thing I voted in was the New York primary in 2020 to try to get more delegates for Bernie. Look how great that turned out. But anyway, like most people in here, probably, my family are like, they're regular Democrat type people. And they were very nervous before the debate because the CNN thing went kind of little shitty for Kamala, more or less. But I told them, I don't care one way or the other, but like I think that, you guys should remember the story would be about how diminished Trump is if it wasn't for Biden. Biden overshadowed it, and he's at least 80% as fucked up as Biden.
Yeah.
And so I told them not to worry.
So, it was really bad. Obviously, it can't be as bad as like Biden because like, he had to drop out. That's how bad his shit was. Having said that, yeah, it was really bad for Donald Trump. I haven't really like talked about some of the I haven't really talked about like some of the high notes, I guess, like some of the funnier moments. There was another really good moment where he was like, "Oh, you wouldn't ever be able to pass that legislation anyway unless you go and vote because the Senate is 50-50. It's like, why are you saying that?
Well, yeah, no, I zeroed in on that one last night because it was like he's saying, you're a Marxist, your dad was a Marxist, all your plans are scary and they're going to ruin America. And you're not even going to be able to do any of them.
Yeah.
All the things I said were so terrifying. You're not going to do any of them. It was a disaster.
He said JD Vance doesn't know shit about him.
He doesn't talk to JD Vance. The whole border bill thing is like classic stupid Democrat bullshit.
Yeah.
And it is not going to work to get them any votes, right? But somehow, and this was a recurring thing with Trump last night, he allowed himself to get baited on this when it would have been so easy for him to say,
that's what I mean.
Anything but what he said. It was baffling. It was like he was trying to lose. It was like he saw the possibility of spending 4 years with JD Vance and thought not worth it. I have never seen a worse performance from him, but I think this is a combination of like his age because he is, he's not as bad as Biden, but he's pretty old. So a lot can happen between now and November, but it's just like if they prepared this badly, what do you think the rest of the operation looks like?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, for sure. I think they're huffing on the same farts that they've been huffing on since 2022 and learned zero lessons from the midterms, where they genuinely, I think, look at Twitter, like all of his staffers are like groypers.
Yes. They're doing the DeSantis shit or the Kamala or Warren 2020 shit before it. They're doing the thing where they'll f themselves up by getting so invested in internet shit. Like in this case, the cat thing is like a day old, and they jammed as much of that shit as they could into his notes. For what reason? Who knows? He talked about that more than he actually tangibly talked about about inflation, which should be his best issue. But it's the same cycle that Kamala and Warren and DeSantis and all these people with internet-focused campaigns have, where they'll f themselves by talking about this internet bullshit like the cats or whatever, and they'll get chunked either in polls or coverage, the type of shit that happens to every bad campaign where everyone's leaking, and they'll go, wow, God, this is so we're gonna lose, this sucks, why can't people see how good the candidate is? How come they can't see what we see from spending 18 hours a day online? And then the candidate, in this case Trump, will do something very similar to what the aforementioned three candidates did, where they'll do like Trump did a Twitter space where he's only talking to his craziest supporters and saying, the dumbest shit that he's never going to be able to do, that he's not going to try to do.
Yeah, but the problem is, and I am really annoyed with this. Democrats are looking at polling and like they look at only one side of that poll and not realize that these are inherently contradictory positions, and they could very easily, just as easily, run the opposing front and counter message against it, leaving that out in the distance because they're fearful that they saw that 60% number. And it's really frustrating because it creates this like closed circuit where that's the only thing that's being discussed.
Yes.
I remember this is one of the most instructive polls I've ever seen that I always reference historically. I believe it was like 75% of Republicans actually, when faced with the consequences of the policy, do not attribute those consequences to the same, like to the Republican Party that they advocate for, because they just like have no way of comprehending how insanely violent that process would look like. The problem is, and I talk about this quite a bit, like there's a permissible level of like misogyny, racism that will gain you a lot of favor with people who have similar opinions, but there's a point that you can't go beyond. And the more like, which is ironic, because Donald Trump used to be a great room reader in general.
Yes.
But he has completely lost his sauce, and he just regularly amps up the rhetoric thinking that like the people like it, because I think he goes to his rallies and he listens to people cheer on whenever he talks about like trans stuff. And even early on, if you remember, he was like, you guys love the trans stuff. It's weird. Like, remember when he was like, yeah, you guys like the trans stuff even more than the tax cuts. I don't know what's going on. And now he does the trans shit.
Yeah. He like, I think like it's a bunch of things, right? Like I feel like one of the worst things that could have happened to the movement in general is part of this is Musk buying Twitter, but it's even stuff before that. There was a general right-wing cultural backlash that was moderately successful. And it was just the inevitability of that happening under like a pretty unpopular Democratic president.
Yeah, no, as soon as Joe Biden won, I said that we're going to go back to Obama culture wars.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly. But like the problem is, because they had spent all these years under Trump having, for the first 2 years at least, like a, almost total control of government, to an extent, only stymied by their own incompetence at times, but they didn't feel like they captured the culture, and all they really wanted was the culture and cultural respect. And for it to be cool to think these things, they weren't happy. But then they got like an inkling of that a little bit from 2021 to present, but it was never like overwhelming. It was never like, do you remember the liberal cultural dominance under Trump was insane. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. The mechanism for conservatives to replicate that does not exist. They don't know how to do it. They are well moneyed. They have good, great amounts of resources. We've talked a lot about the incredible amount of money in conservative media. But for the actual logistics of doing that, they have neither spent the time or the money to acquire the know-how in doing that. They haven't built the relationships. They don't have generations of relationships like Democrats do. And the problem, like the thing with like liberal cultural dominance under Trump was that you could go in the world and you could encounter a lot of people who like maybe weren't as crazy as people you saw in your timeline, but they generally were with this stuff. There's a base of support for this stuff, but not as much. But they're so excited by having even a meager cultural victory that they believe everyone is on their side. And I think it's 2017 in reverse.
I think this also is a company with like a string of like hyper right wing and also increasingly more like micro targeted state legislation victories.
Yes.
That they've accomplished, where they fucked up the system. They completely have officially sidestepped the legislative body, and they just basically run the route every single time of like going to the states with gerrymandered districts and using the state legislature that's like heavily favoring the right to pass like ridiculous bills that I would say are like messaging bills almost, but like it actually does have tangible harm associated with it. And they'll do that, and then they'll take it all the way up to the Supreme Court usually. And the problem there is, I think they're doing that for like no real constituency. But the very fact that they're able to accomplish that, like enact their legislative agenda at the state level at least, leads them into thinking like, oh no, this is successful. Like people like this. People love this. When in fact, all it does, I think, is just like make people more resentful and disgusted with the way that the Republican Party operates. And that is probably the reason why the Democratic Party is genuinely performing well across the board in down ballot races to a degree where they're even doing better than the top of the ticket with Biden and even with Kamala Harris.
I actually think, on balance, from what we've seen so far, it's kind of been better for the Democrats to have a contested cultural space as opposed to having total cultural dominance. Because, I mean, Democrats are stupid and they will anything that you give them.
Yeah.
But they are also going up against another party of, which this is true.
No, I think the Republican successes have made them weaker.
Yes,
like
exactly.
It's made them, because I always go back to the Lee Atwater messaging strategy, right? Like, you can't say the N-word after the civil rights movement. So what do you say? You find a new way to marginalize black people, and you try to hit that from a different angle. Like, you talk about desegregation, or you talk about, welfare queens, right?
Yeah.
Like, you find new ways of dog whistling. And I think in all of this success that they've accomplished as a consequence of Democratic incompetence, they deluded themselves into thinking that they are, one, more popular than they actually are, and two, they got really comfortable in that success. And that's why we're watching this race where Democrats are doing their usual posture of mirroring whatever the Republicans are saying, to be like, we're going to do exactly that, but 10% less. And the Republicans keep just getting more and more insane.
Yeah, I hate to keep harping on this mirrored and looping timelines thing, but one thing I very crucially remember about 2016 and the primary of that year, to the Democratic primary, was this idea among sort of left liberal op-ed writers and the pro-Clinton media apparatus, which was, we did it. We showed that you can win an election without white men, which, I mean, saying that for the Democratic primary is one thing. Yeah, maybe that's true. But they were counting their eggs before they hatched with the general election. They were saying this in August. We're showing that you don't need white men or white working class or whatever it was at the time to win a general election, just going by these polls or these predictions. And hated to break it to them at the time, but it's there's still a lot of white people in this country.
Yeah.
Whether you want to acknowledge that or not.
And the number is growing in terms of people who see themselves as white and report to the census as though they are white. And this goes back to the Hispanic population in this country, and also how so many Latinos in red states will say some of the most unhinged racist shit that you've ever heard in your entire damn life.
But at the same time, it's the Trump campaign is doing, and just the Republican Party in general. We saw this with the midterms. They're doing a version of this. They still, I swear I've seen this every year. Record number of black, one isolated black demographic are voting for Trump this year, and it never really pans out.
Yeah.
But they are generally doing this thing that quasi-racialized in parts where it's we only need white people, even though most of them are aware you need more than just whites to win a federal election in America.
Yeah.
But it's sort of a version of it where it's well, we don't need anyone who is anything less than 100% on board. They believe they're so ahead, or they thought they were so ahead. I don't think they think that anymore, that they did not need the squishy voters who the Trump to Biden voters of 2020. Them. We don't need them. We don't care if we scare them. Who gives a f? We're ascendant.
No, you definitely do.
Yeah.
This goes back to something that you've also talked about quite a bit, which is they've forgotten how to run a normal campaign.
Yeah.
They just you should be talking about tax cuts. You should be talking about the inflation, and then that's it. Immigration's ruining the economy, and that you're going to be a peaceful dove. The overarching unpopularity of both parties in the United States of America circa 2016, we think that Trump is the exception, and that he was exceptionally popular, and then Joe Biden defeated him, and then now the Democrats are exceptionally popular, or the old school Democratic Party politics are actually really popular. But it's no, the third way politics that has seeped through the Democratic Party's campaign strategies are still objectively unpopular.
Yeah. It is sort of amazing how few both parties, broadly speaking, and individual politicians are above water in a polling sense. One of the unique aspects about American politics since after Obama, or even kind of during, is how much everyone hates everyone that they have to vote for. I mean, think about how unpopular both parties are for a second. Then think about how shitty RFK Jr. was doing. Shouldn't this be one of the best years for a third party?
Yeah.
But no one's competent. But when everyone's
what do you mean? The Jill Stein ticket is gonna sweep.
Yeah.
She will. If you vote for her, she will win, Felix.
As a person, I like Jill Stein. There's something like reassuring about her. She reminds me of like one of my mom's friends who's like, I just found this new toothpaste without fluoride. It's great. It makes your gums bleed, but she's so nice. You're like, oh, I love it. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, what party do you know of where they're only really active in presidential elections and it goes anywhere? You know what I mean?
The Green Party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I'm not even voting, so I don't want to scold anyone. I think like the best reason to vote is because it will be fun for you. You gotta get your smiles.
I have to reiterate over and over again. It's like, listen, vote for whoever you want. I would not ever advocate to vote for Trump for sure. Vote for whoever you want, but if you come in here and you're like, oh, if you vote for this person, they will win, or if you come in here and you say stuff like, oh, this is truly going to be a game changer, like, you're wrong. If you think the Democrats are going to learn their lesson if you like punish them, quote unquote, and they lose, you're wrong. It didn't happen in 2016. It's not going to happen. Okay. Even if the Dems lose from this point on, even though this is their race to win, because the Republicans are throwing extra hard, even if every single person in this community was like going out and door knocking for Kamala Harris, it's not going to move the needle. The Democratic Party at the top has to make these changes. Okay. And it will be entirely their fault once again if they lose, right? Having said that, win or lose, they're going to blame you anyway. Yeah. I'm just letting you know. They're going to blame you.